Let's cut to the chase for this video. A lot of people are wondering about if EU5 is the game for them, about if EU5 lives up to the immense weight that its franchise carries. How friendly is it for new players? How much skill expression is there? Is the AI challenging? Among other common questions. I wanted to make this video to talk a bit about EU5's gameplay loops in a sort of non-review format. I say non-review because I haven't played enough of the game to give a proper review that would have much value. I haven't experienced gameplay on more than just a handful of tags, nor have I ever played past about 1650 in any of my runs. Nonetheless, I want to do what I can to help answer some questions about the game, so let's do that. I want this video to be a quick rundown of the concepts of EU5 and how they'll appeal to people coming from different game genres that I'm at least somewhat familiar with. I think the best way to explain how EU5 feels is to talk about something called gardening, and to compare the gardening experience in EU5 to other games to help understand it. Gardening in EU5 is contrasted by what I've started to think of as, well, being on cocaine. I've never done any drugs before, but sometimes grand strategy games can demand of you a requisite level of hyper-focus in order to achieve something great. Think of insane Hearts of Iron 4 micro, or an EU4 World Conquest where you're batting down rebels constantly while also fighting all your enemies. A lot of Paradox games, and by extension other strategy games like say Civilization, fall into this bimodal playstyle. Have you ever played Civ and been really invested in some war to the point that you started to ignore your city's production a bit? Not like entirely forgotten about it, but you just kind of mindlessly click on an option to get the notification to go away? That's because during an important war, you've exited the gardening loop, and I think at this point you get what I'm saying. One more thing I want to say before we really get started with this video is that before I talk about EU5's approachability, I just want to say that I think this may be one of those legendary games that goes down in history as one of the greatest grand strategy games out there, but that label comes with all the baggage that such a label comes with. The game is complex, long-winded, slow-paced, and challenging, but I don't think I've ever seen any game simulate so holistically the governance of a state through 5 centuries than what I've seen EU5 do. If you choose to skip out on the game, that's of course your choice, but I do wholeheartedly recommend this game to anyone that's a fan of strategy games, and I call it a must-buy for any grand strategy game enthusiast. With that, I want to talk about EU5's gardening gameplay to help you understand what moment-to-moment gameplay in EU5 is like, and whether it appeals to you. To help do that, I'll compare it to other gardening experiences across the strategy game genre. If you've played EU4, then you might wonder what gardening in EU4 even looks like. The honest answer is that EU4 only barely has such a gameplay loop. I understand this is a bit of a controversial thing to say, but playing tall in EU4 is barely even gaming. I'm not trying to be mean, and if you enjoy sitting in Holland clicking the development buttons, then you do you and have fun, but you have to admit, there's not a lot going on there in comparison to something like Victoria 3. We'll talk about that game in a minute, but first back to Europa Universalis. EU4 and EU5 both are games largely about resource acquisition and requisition. That is to say, you have things, and you must use them for mutually exclusive purposes. That mutually exclusive term is important, and most exemplified by mana in EU4. You probably already know how that works, and that's why we need to talk about EU5's rendition of this idea. In EU5 there's no more mana, but there's gold, in the form of ducats. Ducats do in EU5 everything that mana points once did in EU4. This matters because you don't have a cap on how many ducats you can make. You know how in EU4 you can basically make at most something like 18 points of any particular type in a month? That'd be the base of 3, a 6-point ruler, a tier 5 advisor, focusing on that point type, and more than 50 power projection. 18 points in 1 month is a lot, but it is a limit. Well, in EU5, the sky's the limit, my friend. If you find a way to make more money, then you'll make more and be able to use it to gain huge power. In EU4, infinite ducats are nice, but in EU5, infinite ducats may as well be infinite power. I mean, not quite, but you take my point, right? Because of the importance of ducats, the importance of gardening has been elevated, and EU5 gives you tools to garden in the form of a significantly more complex economy than EU4, but one still simpler than, say, Victoria 3. With this further emphasis on what we might call broadly playing tall, EU5 has stepped back some of the explosive gameplay from its predecessors. In EU4, getting into war is pretty easy and common. There are many CBs and many ways to acquire them, but not so in EU5. That being said, I want to be clear that if you want more opportunities for war and more CBs than just the Parliament one, you can get them. The best way to get more CBs is to use subjects that have cores or claims and wait for them to fabricate CBs for you, or if you get lucky, your subject might just use their Parliament to get a CB that you can then push. So you hear that and you might think, wow, they made EU5 have less war, they want you to sit and play tall all day, boring. And there's some merit to that, but I think instead the focus on having some playing tall gameplay is to emphasize that a new part of the skill expression in EU5 is to manage your nation. While previously most of the competent management of a nation was abstracted as your ruler's skill points, and there are still skill points in EU5, but I digress, much of that abstraction has been turned into actual gameplay for you. Had the game been as war-oriented as EU4, you might find yourself never interacting with the gardening mechanics and then wondering why you can't gain power. But here's the key. If you manage your economy well enough, then you can afford to put more money into stability and diplomatic spending, which will in turn make declaring wars with no casus belli something you can do more often. You might hear that getting CBs is hard, and therefore think that your capacity to fight any wars at all is super limited. Instead, it's better to think of every nation as having a sort of capacity for war that is around one war every 5 years, plus additional CBs depending on the situation. Reclaiming cores, conquering claimed land, religious wars, throne claims, etc. These are additional CBs which are situational, but only your parliament gives you a CB that applies in 100% of all cases. However, if you want more universal CBs than one every 5 years, use the no CB option and eat the stability hit. If your economy is healthy enough, you could just buy back the stability, no problem. That cocaine-like experience I mentioned EU4 having, you can still get it in EU5, but you'll have to earn it with playing tall. That's the beauty. You're not actually limited. You just have to be better at the game to escape your perceived limitations. Part of those limitations is also the fact that gaining power in general is a little more complicated with EU5. In EU4, you conquer land, you lower its autonomy, you gain power. Simple. In EU5, you conquer land, and it's entirely possible that your conquest will have done absolutely nothing to further your power, because all the pops there are discriminated, you have no control over it due to its distance from your capital, and you're only really gaining access to the RGOs there, which may or may not be useful to you depending on your economy, or you're depriving potential rivals of land they could otherwise have had, which is only hurting others and not necessarily helping you. With that in mind, the chief question to ask yourself with regards to EU5 is if you'll enjoy doing a little realm maintenance between your conquests. The gameplay loop is often along the lines of building up your economy while checking for opportunities to war or managing your relationships with nearby nations, and then, if you spot a good opportunity to go to war, you use your parliament to get a CB or else cross your fingers and hope that by the time parliament is available, your opportunity hasn't passed. Or you go for the patrician CB, also known as no CB. EU5 is also very self-directed unlike EU4 thanks to its lack of mission trees. So, while EU4 may have extrinsically motivated you to develop and play tall because of some kind of mission requirement, EU5 will not necessarily push you in any direction. If you spot a good opportunity to develop a city or something, then take it because it will give you an edge over your enemies, rather than because you've been directed to do so. This, I think, will be the disconnect for EU4 players. I'm intending for this video to come out pretty much right when the game comes out, so maybe some of you fresh players can let me know if that's true or not, but I think EU4 players will need some time to acclimate to the fact that yes, EU5 is way more of a sandbox than EU4. It's not a total sandbox, but it's much more of one. In theory, it's quite possible to just sort of hit the wall of motivation. I could conquer more, but why? And that wall exists in EU4 as well, but a lot of the most popular tags in the game had extensive mission trees which would motivate continuous play. What comes with this sandbox is significantly more creativity in my opinion, which I'm quite happy to see. Personally, I love it, but just keep in mind that it's different from EU4. One thing I do immediately predict is a backlash from the EU4 community towards EU5, which will center on the deprioritization of conquest in return for a focus on empire building in the broad sense of the term. EU4's empire building was quite literal in that you conquer land and assemble your empire's physical presence on the map. EU5's empire building is more along the lines of actual statecraft and management, and that makes it inherently a different game. With that, I want to talk a little bit about the comparison to Victoria 3, which I think is a game that will have a lot of migrants coming in droves to EU5. I actually have a lot to say about EU5's comparison to Victoria 3, and a lot of what I said with a bit more vagueness in my first impressions video, I can now clarify thanks to a couple dozen more hours of play, which have helped me to cement my thoughts into something tangible. EU5's economy is a whole lot more consumption-oriented than Victoria 3's, and what I mean by that is that in Victoria 3 your main hurdle is obtaining goods for your market. In EU5 your main hurdle is finding uses for the goods in your market. Allow me to explain. Let's say you're playing Florence and you produce a ton of fine cloth with an excellent profit margin. Well, eventually the price of fine cloth in your market will hit the price floor, which is a 33% lower price than its base price. If the game were like Victoria 3, that'd be excellent, because the floored price would see your pops gaining standard of living, which would in turn see them consume more fine cloth and bring the price back up, allowing your fine cloth workshops to continue bringing in profits. This is not so in EU5. Once that price has been floored, you'll sit there, watching your fine cloth workshops struggle to stay profitable. You can decrease the cost of their input goods, and you can acquire more pops to purchase the goods. Those are your options with regards to continuing to spiral the economy upwards. Now here's the thing. That first option, acquiring more input goods, well, you either trade for it, or you acquire those RGOs. And this is where EU5 will push you into war. In Victoria 3, if, say, you're playing Britain or America or France or any relatively large, major or great power, then your nation has, within its borders already, plenty of resources to get you through to the late game without needing a single piece of conquest, with the explicit exception of stuff like rubber, silk, dyes, or other exotic goods. Conquer 1 or 2 states, and now you have those things. Boom. In EU5, your need to maintain the profitability on your buildings means that you will first build up all your local RGOs, and then eventually look outward. EU5 pushes you towards war all the time in a way that Victoria 3 only kind of does with a handful of things. The Florence example really goes hard here because one of the best RGOs in Italy is the Silk RGO, and most of Italy's Silk RGOs are among the richest and most well-guarded cities in the peninsula. If you want more silk, you'll have to really fight for it, or else spend a lot of money on marketplaces to import it. Your other option for keeping profits up is to acquire a new customer base, which again is done by either trading or conquering. When you conquer land within your own market, you're not necessarily gaining any new customers. But if you conquer land in foreign markets and then move those locations into your market, then you will be actively adding demand to your goods. Alongside that, by conquering more land, you are becoming a more competitive trader by simply depriving another nation of a place where they could have had marketplaces. Essentially, my point is that in Victoria 3, you can look basically entirely inward as any medium to large sized nation and garden to your heart's content. In EU5, you will very quickly stall out your economy and then be forced to look outward. You know, the irony is not lost on me that the Victoria 3 player base is going to have to get used to EU5 force them to look outward, while the EU4 player base is going to have to get used to the game force them to look inward. I think that both gameplay loops are fun enough that both player bases will enjoy the new perspective, but it's hard to really get into people's heads and know for sure. I can easily see the Victoria 3 players being upset that their economy is stalling out, but to be clear, that's an intentional outcome of being too inwardly focused, at least I think it is. No one has gone out and explicitly said that to me, but based on how the game plays, it feels that way. The ultimate cap on your ability to garden really is pops though. Through trade, you can always expand your potential demand for goods, just like in Victoria 3, but once you hit the building cap on a location, the cost to build there gets way more expensive, and with that you'll be dealing with immense inefficiencies that will see you fall behind your enemies, as you spend 5 or 6 times the money to make the same buildings as them. This is another outward push the game has, is its building limit, which is determined by the pops in your location. The more pops, the higher the building limit, but this game doesn't have any labor-saving production methods, so once you've employed everyone and hit your building limit, you really will need to go out and get some new cities if you want to keep growing your economy. It should also of course be said that EU5 is a game where you are much more directly playing as the state. Some people say in Victoria 3 you play as the spirit of the nation or other such abstractions, and that's why you're incentivized to do more than just tax people into oblivion to fund your state machinations. No. In EU5, you always want to crank taxes as much as possible because your ability to turn your people's economic output into usable tax for your state is everything. EU5 is deeply extractive, and you will find little to no ability to run some kind of standard of living oriented playthrough style. Anyway, with that, there's actually one more game I want to bring up as a comparison for EU5, and that's actually Civilization, alongside some other strategy games. So I think it's entirely possible that there will be people migrating into EU5 from games like Civilization and Total War. Now I need to say right away, I haven't played any Total War games, and in terms of Civilization, I've only played 5 and 6, and I haven't played either of them in a few years, so my experience is kind of a distant memory. Regardless, I remember the vibe of playing Civilization, and I could speak broadly about Total War as a game. In Civilization, there's a lot more gardening going on in general, I'd say, and I think that the game has a wider variety of focused playstyles than EU5. In Civ, you will of course build up every resource, but if, say, you're playing Korea in Civ 5, you're obviously meant to be heading towards a science build. You'll still use gold, and food, and production, and so on, but you have a clear specialization. In EU5, most nations have some kind of specialization through their unique advancements, but these specializations pale in comparison to the importance of a nation's starting position. For example, the reason why Florence focuses on fine cloth is mostly because they have 2 things that make for the success of a fine cloth business. a relatively rich base of nobles and burghers that can buy the cloth, and a local source of silk to supply the workshop with. That being said, Florence does also have the Arte della Lana advancement, which directly increases their ability to produce fine cloth, but that's only a nudge rather than a huge push. In that sense, every nation in EU5 engages in just about every aspect of the game. The exception is stuff like perhaps colonization and exploration, where you're unlikely to be making colonies off of the New World if you're playing, say, Poland. Again, this is because of their position in the world, not necessarily because of the unique nature of their nation. That all being said, EU5 is a game which will likely appeal to you if you're a civilization head, since civilization has a similar gameplay loop of focusing inward and using the strength you build from that inward focus to then look outward. Now, Total War. So again, not super experienced with Total War, but the thing I think you might be disappointed by is that there aren't a ton of units to play around with. In EU5, there are a handful of kinds of infantry, a handful of cavalry, artillery, and supply units. With each era come upgraded units that are just better than old ones, akin to civilization, and the unit variety doesn't really increase. Instead, what you're doing is balancing how much of your economy you can sacrifice for simply having a larger army, and deciding between stuff like defensive or offensive values and quality or quantity values. Some nations come with special units or buildings around the military, like the Ottomans and their Janissary barracks and Janissary units. These units provide some marginal numerical differences, but are otherwise relatively similar to the basic units of the game. Rather than worrying about troop composition so much, you'll be worrying about how willing you are to throw your people away to war. If you were listening to previous sections, then you know that your economy is capped more or less by your population. Well, when you raise your levies and send them out to die in war, those are potential consumers and workers that are removed from the game. That is your potential power being eradicated as food for the vultures, and you want to avoid that if you can. The military in EU5 is a compromise rather than its main goal. It's something which you only want to use to the extent that it's necessary to keep your gardens safe and growing. An EU5 campaign that solely invests in its military will find little to do, especially since the first phase of the game doesn't even have professional armies. It's not until much later in the game that regular professional soldiers are even worth using. So if you're a total war guy, prepare for a game where war is not an afterthought per se, but deprioritized in favor of a larger strategy game. If you've played Total War games and found yourself interested in the larger economic and logistic systems those games offer, then EU5 will scratch that itch for you, but if you're only interested in army building and composition, then EU5 will have very little to offer you. Anyway, we've talked about gardening quite a bit, and I want to touch briefly on the other side of EU5's gameplay, which is when things get a bit intense. In games in general, there's this term called the skill ceiling, contrasted with the skill floor, and it refers to essentially how good a person has to be at a minimum to play the game, and how good a person can get at a game. Your classic high skill ceiling games are stuff like, CSGO or StarCraft, these extremely high level professional esport type games. High skill floor games are stuff like, well, the Paradox games for one, but for a more traditional choice, something like Dark Souls or Elden Ring. These are games that you have to be good at right away in order to play. EU5 has a somewhat high skill floor, but the skill ceiling is absolutely insane. I'm going to expand a bit more in the next chapter on what I mean about this, but let me be clear that the economic part of the game has a lot going on if you want to engage with it. You can check for the perfect river, farmland, meadow with just the right RGOs and micromanage the rural locations and urban locations using your cabinet to manage migration and create an extremely strong region of power that uses its local RGOs to make high profit finished goods that you trade away to somebody that doesn't have those goods. You can go for a more simple import raw materials into export finished goods supply chain, and doing these things is correct. It will matter and it will make you more powerful. Because money is everything in EU5 and money can be created pretty much infinitely, your power is infinitely scalable according to your skill and ability to create a stronger and stronger economy. This is important because I think so much of EU5's discourse has talked about the game being too easy or something, but the game has a huge skill ceiling, it just has a lower skill floor. That being said, that might not appeal to everyone. For some people, they want to be challenged by the AI and don't care to just stack numbers and gain power for themselves. EU5 is a game where progress is measured by defeating the AI, but also by defeating your own previous bests. But before I go off on too much of a tangent, I want to wrap up this little video and just yap for a bit about some of EU5's design philosophy and where it succeeds or fails in appealing to different sorts of players' wants. There were a couple of questions I had posed in the intro of this video that I think I can best answer by being given a chance to just yap a bit about the game. And this rant will tie into the appeal of the game to different audiences, but I think we should talk about difficulty in a game like this. Because of EU5's asymmetrical nature, it means that difficulty is, more than anything, determined by what nation you start as. Yes, if you begin the game as some tiny little country with nothing going for it, you're going to have a very hard time, whereas if you begin as France or Castile or something, the game will be a bit easier. There are two tracks of progress to be had in the game like this: defeating the AI and defeating your own measure of success. Once you understand the game and are good at it, yes, you will probably not lose to the AI much. You'll still have trouble as a small nation, but once you've gotten past the initially tough life of a minor nation, you'll be fine. You might think that means there's no point to play, but EU5 is a lot like Victoria 3 and EU4 in the sense that your real goal is to achieve something that you're proud of. It's very difficult, I think, for any game to make an AI that can be challenging and interesting for literally hundreds or thousands of hours even. EU5 presents to you an AI that will probably keep you on your toes for your first 50 hours of play, maybe 100. And then after that, the AI is a relatively minor consideration compared to your own sense of achievement. There are a couple of nations that will be your big bads that get very strong and are hard to take down, like France, Bohemia, or Korea, among potentially others. France is the big one, and France is indeed super strong. You can defeat them, absolutely, but you'll need to acquire a certain level of skill in both gardening your economy and fighting wars to be able to do so. I want to make it clear that for people newly arriving to this game, or perhaps even the entire genre, the AI will present a very rough challenge. The AI could be better at the game, it sometimes lacks aggression, and it can be a bit predictable, yes, but if you're new to the game, it'll keep you on your toes for sure. It's very important that you understand that EU5 is a game where the peak of challenge is found in pushing your campaigns further than the previous ones. It's a sort of self-challenge more than anything. I should also tell you that if, say, you've decided to take the dive into EU5, do not feel compelled to take a campaign all the way to 1836, which is the end date. If you feel like you've accomplished what you wanted to do, just cut the campaign and start again if you want, or play to the end, up to you. It's in the nature of these kinds of games to pretty rarely actually complete any campaign, which I think will feel familiar to many strategy gamers coming from the wider GSG or 4X community. Continuing to harp on the new player phenomenon, EU5 has quite a few fault points, in the sense that you can jump into the game and then totally faceplant and feel lost. Now, I'm of the opinion that among at least the Paradox grand strategy games, EU5 is among the most approachable of them, not because it lacks complexity, but because it has a robust hint system and its mechanics are, at least compared to something like Victoria 3, pretty straightforward. I always feel funny saying that, knowing that in comparison to most other games, EU5 is immensely complex. Now, away from failure points, let me talk about the joy of EU5 and the potential for new players to fall in love. First, I want to say that if you come at this game with an attitude of, I will probably lose a bit and then one day succeed, you'll be very happy. EU5 is a game with immense joy in finally winning after much failure. You will stumble, you will fall, and you will probably get frustrated at times, but there's a lot of fun to be found in just unraveling the game. You'll find yourself mastering a particular mechanic and thinking you know what you're doing, so then you start a new campaign and use your new knowledge to play better, and you can feel how your skill and understanding have led you to having a more powerful nation. That is contrasted with the skill that you'll gain on particular nations. If you repeat the same nation over and over on different campaigns, you'll understand the strong moves for that country better and better, and learn to leverage that nation's advancements to overtake your opponent, and that is also a form of knowledge. Now, it's not as transferable as learning the mechanics broadly, but it absolutely still counts. Those skills that you don't master, you don't necessarily need to sweat. EU5 is a game where if you entirely ignore a mechanic or two, you can still play, either by automating it or just letting it sit there wasting away. You'll be weaker the more that you automate and ignore, but it'll let you actually play the game without a prerequisite learning curve of 100 hours. I find games like Hearts of Iron 4 especially suffer with stuff like that, where it's almost impossible to really play without understanding, at least to a minimal extent, every aspect of the game. With EU5, you can jump in and just start playing, letting the numbers glaze over you if you want. Hey, quick advice for new players, by the way, build roads. Also, just use the automation system if you really want to play but don't want to sit and learn the game. Automation works well enough to start. Now, for the EU4 people and veterans of the game, I know you're worried about the AI and you're worried about the game being too passive. Those are valid worries, but I'm here to tell you that this game still has a huge skill ceiling, and I think that a world conquest is possible. People thought a Victoria 3 world conquest wouldn't be possible, and then people went and did it anyway, and I think EU5 will be no different. There are ways to get CBs beyond Parliament, by the way, and it mostly involves releasing subjects that can generate CBs via claims or cores, but I won't lie to you, making it so that you can essentially get one Parliament CB every 5 years is a really interesting way to balance the game and push you towards an inward focus. Not to mention that no CBs are way more viable now. If you want to declare some quick war on a tiny nation next to you and you don't want to waste your Parliament CB on it, just do a no CB. Because stability is inherently tied to money now, your ability to play tall and garden in your nation will directly impact your ability to continue declaring wars via no CB declarations. That means that if you feel your ability to declare war is too hindered, then just get better at playing tall so you can have the stability required to not need a CB. It's as easy as that. I encourage the Victoria 3 players to come into this game with an open mind and to consider playing with more in mind than just the economy. I think Victoria 3 is a game which trains its players to only think about the economic implications of its systems, which works for that game, but for EU5 there's just so much more going on. I think Generalist said it best in his review, which I just finished watching as of writing this at 1:51 AM on November 4th. Nice. He said that many games do individual things in EU5 better than EU5 does, but no game puts it all together how EU5 has done so. Come at EU5 with a holistic mindset and treat it like the multifaceted gem that it is, and you'll have tons of fun. There's one last thing I have to say, and this is of course because I'm a Crusader Kings 3 player. You should roleplay in this game. You know, you can downgrade cities to towns and then towns to rural locations, and the thing about doing this is that very often it's not a good idea. But I'm just saying that when you conquer your ultimate rival's capital city, nothing is sweeter than the vengeance of turning their city into a stretch of farmland. Sure, it's the wrong choice, and sure you'll only be hurting yourself, but damn if it isn't fun. My CK3 players, do your thing and bring RP to EU5 because I think grand strategy games, strangely, are best played in this style. With that, let's call it a video. I hope it helped you understand if EU5 is a game for you, and if it is, and you buy it, best of luck to you. Thank you for your time.